Congressman, I'll start with you, just because of your vast experience in the military itself. Can you give us an insight as to what you expect to hear from President Trump tonight?
Well, I hope that what he'll do is define what the objective is at this point in Afghanistan, and then how we're going to marshal resources to achieve that objective on behalf of the United States. And it seems like through most of our commitment there, it's kind of been muddling along. I do think that there are significant threats still emanating out of Afghanistan if you look at the terror networks involved both in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I also hope if he does decide to maintain the commitment, that he'll do so with having legitimate rules of engagement to actually let our troops do their job and fight the enemy, and not have such restrictive rules that they're basically fighting with one hand tied behind their backs.
Certainly. And your take on the fact that in June we know that he authorized up to, I think, 3,900 more troops potentially to be deployed there. What's your personal take and your professional analysis around more troops on the ground in Afghanistan?
Well, to me, the troops follow from the first question about the objective. And simply putting more troops in without defining the objective that we're trying to see is not something that I think is necessarily going to make the big difference. What is the objective, and how are you going to achieve that objective?
Jessica, let me ask you, after almost 16 years in Afghanistan, what do you think, what do you expect possibly that President Trump could do that would be different than what we've seen from George W. Bush or President Obama?
Well, I'm hopeful, as everyone on the panel so far has pointed out, that it is clear what his intention is, and he's not only going to talk about the fact that those troops are going to be deployed. We've seen early reports that that is what is going to happen, but also outline the goals for civil society in Afghanistan, which is a key piece of ending a war anywhere successfully and making sure that we don't leave Afghanistan as much of a mess as we found it in. I'm not completely sure if President Trump is going to be able to articulate that. I realize this will be a teleprompter speech, and hopefully he will stay on the teleprompter the entire time, and so we will be hearing essentially from General Mattis.
Most presidents would use a teleprompter and address like
that's why I'm saying that I hope that there is no ad-libbing to this, because this is so important, it's so critical, and I think something that can help him a lot at this particular moment. After last week's events, I think that he needed something like this, and I wonder if the timing of this announcement has to do with how badly last week went. If the troop authorization came in June, why is this suddenly happening today?
Let me follow up on that line of questioning, Jessica. Is this, you think, an attempt by the president to shift the narrative around this very heated debate around Charlottesville and the clear domestic violence, domestic terrorism that happened there? Also, this ongoing debate now about Confederate statues. Is this a shift in narrative intentionally?
I do believe that, and especially after what happened with the USS John McCain, which we'll be talking about later in the program. So yes, I think it's part of that, and also after the Barcelona terror attack, which I realize we'll also address later in the show, I think that it's important for the president to refocus on things where he can have more command of them in this way and be backed up by the generals in his administration who are widely and bipartisanly liked.
Kat, let me ask you this. The congressman talked about kind of unshackling the hands of some of our generals and leaders on this issue, and that's something that President Trump has spoken about. Do you think that's at least indicative of something that will be a better outcome than what we've seen in the past 15 years when it comes to Afghanistan?
16 years is a really long time. We've put so much effort, we've lost lives, so much money. 60%, the U.S.-backed Afghan government only controls 60% of its territory. I think that President Trump is up against the fact that, you know, getting out of Afghanistan is something that people like to say, but you're up against the, military-industrial complex if you sort of suggest it. And also, Russia wants him to get out, so he would run the risk of people saying, oh, you're just doing whatever Putin wants you to do if he did, when in reality, that's what he ran on. Those are the things that he said. And of course, he's not the first candidate turned president to do something like that. President Obama did the exact same thing. All the little peace sign stickers with the O's and the peace signs, and, he escalated things over there anyway. So this is par for the course. People run on this, and it seems to be hard to actually pull off.
So to that point, Lisa, President Obama absolutely ran, and many would say won in 2008 on being the anti-war president, then gets in the Oval, I'm assuming learns a lot more about the situation, sees it's not as easy to pull out everything at the same time. Do you think there's a political consequence in running a particular way? As President Trump also ran as an anti-interventionist and then having to pivot mid-course.
But we also didn't see him say a whole lot about Afghanistan, so there have been questions.
But in general, he talked about America first, right?
But he's not really, but what has he engaged us in?
No, I'm not saying that he has. I'm saying that we're going to find out more tonight.
No, I mean, he did a 59, what was it, 59 missiles.
That counts.
We're not really, though.
Yeah.
Well, he would make the point, because he was very much against the intervention in Iraq. He would always say that. Yes. But he would also make the point is once you went in, to precipitously take the troops out like President Obama did, that created the means for ISIS to then take that territory. So he was, I think, in the campaign saying, hey, you have to play the cards you're dealt, in addition to having kind of his initial view.
But fundamentally, he was arguing that we could not be the world's policeman anymore. Yeah. That was his argument. And if you read Twitter today, you would see a number of people, maybe of the more liberal persuasion, retweeting old Trump tweets where he said very clearly, President Obama, you're doing the wrong thing by putting more people into that region. We need to get out. We need to get out. So it is against his campaign promise there, and this is something that I think could activate a Steve Bannon against him.
Well, I think President Trump has also said that he doesn't want to set things like timetables, so hopefully he doesn't do that tonight to box himself in politically, because this really shouldn't be political. This is about what our military advisors are saying, and, you know, if there is any ability to sort of win in Afghanistan or push the Taliban out, which, you know, I think there's a lot of questions about that. But, Congressman, I have a question for you. You know, a couple weeks ago, it was reported that there was a joint Taliban and ISIS attack that killed 50 people. What do you know about ISIS's, you know, what kind of foothold do they have in Afghanistan right now that you know of?
Well, I think it's a much stronger foothold than we would have thought, you know, 12 or 18 months ago. And so that's the risk you run. Obviously, he campaigned in terms of not necessarily getting involved in nation building. We've obviously done a lot of nation building there unsuccessfully in many respects. There's no doubt about that. But the question is, if you decide to simply get out now, and is that ISIS presence going to metastasize? And if it does, is that something that is good for the United States' national security interests? So he's got to make those hard decisions in real time based on the information that he's getting from the people that he's put in those positions of authority in the military and in our intelligence services.
And again, Congressman, from your experience, is there such thing as winning at this point, 15 and some change years in? Is there such thing as an American victory when it comes to Afghanistan?
Well, look, we did win initially militarily. They took out the Taliban. They routed al-Qaeda. We then went into a nation-building phase, which I think is different because you can't win that militarily. I mean, you're taking a pre-modern society trying to create a democracy. So I think you can win if the goal is tactically destroying the ISIS remnants and the Taliban. You can do that. Can you make Afghanistan a thriving country militarily? It can't be done militarily.
Kat, question for you. As we sit here very much, I think still very much a nation divided along certain domestic issues. Do you think having a conversation tonight nationally around Afghanistan, around a national security issue, will be helpful by way of resolving some of that division that we have here in America right now?
I don't think so. Sorry to say, I would like to
not
see
a rallying the flag moment.
I would like to. Yeah, I really don't. I think that there'll be people who will find issues with whatever he says, or people that will refuse to find issues no matter what he says. It's very divided, and people are very stuck in their camps regardless of what happens. And I think that I can't even think of a single thing that would maybe change that.
But tonight has nothing to do with Charlottesville. This is He is the President of the United States. We're obviously facing threats in Afghanistan. We saw, as I mentioned before, the Taliban and ISIS in a joint attack 2 weeks ago. We know that there are Taliban groups reportedly pledging allegiance to ISIS. This is a war that we are facing against terror that has obviously taken a long time. We mentioned 16 years in Afghanistan. He's the President of the United States, and he's addressing the country tonight on an issue that he's supposed to lead on. So this has nothing to do with Charlottesville, and I really think it's dangerous to try to make this some sort of...
No, I never said that. I absolutely never said anything.
I hope that's not the case. I hope that's not what we're doing right now.
That's actually the opposite, Lisa. Listen to the question that I asked Kat. Is this a moment for a rallying cry for us to have a universal moment to consider what's in the best interest of the entire American people? That's actually exactly what my question is.
Yeah, and I don't think so, and I think that's unfortunately because a lot of people just don't want that.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah, and I would just quickly, if there's 1 second to add, I think that actually what unifies every single event that goes on from Charlottesville to tonight's announcement is
that we're all Americans?
Well, yeah, absolutely, and that we all kind of watch the eclipse. No,
well,
that all of these moments are opportunities for the president to lead, and you used the word lead there. And I think that people will not forget what his leadership looked like last week, even if tonight's leadership seems more sound to them. So I think that we can't take these exercises in isolation at this point.
We will certainly continue this conversation. It's a lot to cover, but make sure